The other great problem is hardly anyone in this country, I know there are a few, but there are so few that the percentage would be in single digits, absolutely. Hardly any churches today practice biblical church discipline. And when a church decides it is not going to practice church discipline, or it is going to ignore church discipline, it has basically looked at its master and said, I will not obey you. And I have heard people say, they've said it, they just didn't realize what they were saying. When they say something, we don't discipline anybody here, we're going to love people. As opposed to the Christ who commanded you to discipline people. So I suppose your love is greater than His, and yet He says, no greater love has anyone than this, that He laid down His life for His friends. This same one who laid down His life for His friends commanded church discipline. And the reason why the church is in such a state is because it's no longer understood, it's no longer practiced. Even the entire way congregations are set up now, the megachurch mentality, everything else, it is absolutely impossible to do what Jesus said. How do you know when your church structure is not correct? How do you know when your church is too big? When you can't follow the commands of Christ within that body. That's how you know. And yet preachers today say, we can't do this because we're too big. Then your bigness ought to scare you. We can't do this because we don't think it's loving. You have opposed Christ. Paul is very clear in his letter to Timothy, in 1 Timothy, that he says, Timothy, I'm not sure I'm going to make it to you, so I'm writing to you these things that you'll know how to conduct yourself. And what that means is, you don't have the right, nor does your pastor, or if you are a pastor, you do not have the right to conduct yourself in church as seems right in your own eyes. You have the strict command to follow the Master with regard to His bride. If I had to leave my bride with you and go on a long journey, I would give you careful instructions, and I would deal with you if they were not carried out. And He has given us instructions. It is not a cruel, punitive church discipline. No, it is a loving, compassionate church discipline that God has given us in order to restore sinners and to protect the reputation of the church. And when you refuse to be a part of that, you are disobeying Christ. There's just no other way to say it. I'm sorry, there's not. There have been scholars down through the ages who have said, actually, that the moment a church ceases to practice church discipline, it ceases to be a church. This is so, brothers, it is so very, very important. Church discipline. Now let me just go with you real quick what that means, because some of you probably have never even heard of this. It comes about that within the congregation it is discovered there is a brother in a sin, in a continuous, ongoing sin, usually public, usually scandalous. But it doesn't have to be public necessarily, and it doesn't have to be scandalous. A brother is in sin. Another brother goes to him and says, brother, according to Matthew 18, brother, you're in sin. And if the person says, oh, I recognize it, I repent, thank you, then he's won his brother. There's nothing left to do. Unless it be something greatly public and scandalous that must be taken care of in a public manner. But he's won his brother. But if the brother says, I don't care, I'll continue in my sin, then the brother who has rebuked him goes and gets wiser men than himself to judge, usually the elders. And they come together and they deal with the brother. Brother, you must turn away from this adultery. You must turn away from this sin you're committing. You must turn away from your idolatry. And he tells the pastor, no, I don't care. Then after much admonition and prayer and heart-wrenching intercession by those involved, finally, after pleading and pleading, they bring it before the congregation. And the congregation begs this brother with tears in their eyes, please turn from your sin. And he says, no, I will not. Then they put him out. They do not put him out for punitive reasons. They put him out for redemptive reasons. So that if he is a believer, God in His providence will deal with him. Even to the point of unleashing Satan himself. until that brother is brought back into the fold. And the moment he walks in those doors, repentant and broken, the church envelops him in such love, works for his restoration, lays down their life for him. But in many cases, what happens is the man is turned out. He continues in his sin. The providence of God never becomes evident. Satan is never unleashed. And it is proven that that man has been a false convert from the start. Brothers, we're not given options. I mean, I know what's taught in seminary. I deal with seminaries. Not in all seminaries, but in most of these seminaries today, it's like, well, if you want to start a church like this plan over here, plan A, and then there's plan B for this certain demographic, and then there's plan C, and this is a new way of doing it, and this is a new... Who gave you the right? Who do you think you are? One of the most fearful things that is going to be on the day of judgment is to have been an evangelical pastor in the United States of America. It will be terrifying. When many of them are cast into hell and others of them see their entire ministry burned up. It's kind of a side note, but let me just share with you, because if you're a pastor here, I want you to realize this. Most churches today, you go to even some of the most carnal, and you will find within that church a group of people who all they want is Jesus. I mean, it's unbelievable. All they want is to hear the Word preached. They just want to worship. They want a ministry. They just want Jesus. It's all they want. But it's a tiny segment of people in this huge carnal company. And the pastors, what do? Now think about this. They spend all their time, all their energy, and direct everything in the service and everything in their ministries in order to cater to the carnal wicked in their church. And in doing so, the bride of Christ is over there starving to death. Can't you see it? It's all over America. This one little group in the church, all it wants is Jesus. It is the bride of Christ. And this minister spends his entire life giving smoke up on the stage and dry ice and entertainment and all kinds of worldly carnal promises, feeding the carnal while the bride of Christ starves to death. And they will be judged for what they have done to His bride. Bunch of little boys. Most of the lot unconverted. No sense of God about them and no sense of the stewardship and the seriousness of that stewardship. They would all do well to be converted and then to read Richard Baxter's Reformed Pastor. It would help them. Spurgeon's lectures to my students. Portraits of Paul. We live in... Don't think that I'm just some wild man up here. Open your eyes and look what's actually being done. If my wife had to go shopping late at night, she's coming out of the Walmart store and going to her car. She's attacked by 3 men who begin to beat her and abuse her severely. And you, knowing my wife, you walk by her, sir, and out of fear for your own skin, self-preservation, you act like you do not know what's going on, and you let her be abused by such men. I'll find those men. I will, and I'll deal with them. But then I'll come for you. Then all the evangelical pastors should hear what I'm saying. You cater to the carnal to keep your big church and your big buildings and everything else, while the bride of Christ wilts away in a corner, pining only for Christ. That's what's going on in America. It's what's going on in America. And there are certain things for which we should have no patience. And that's one of them. Just remember this, if you use carnal means to gather carnal men into your church, you will have to increasingly give them more carnal things in order to keep them. But if you're looking for the bride of Christ and you're doing all things, suffering all things for the sake of the elect, all you're going to have to do is preach Jesus and they'll come around. Let's go back to our message.